Welcome to EV Hub Live. EV Hub Live is a live video podcast for public policy professionals working to advance transportation electrification. EV Hub Live is recorded live, so to tune in and ask questions or check the schedule, please visit atlasevhub.com/live. In this episode of EV Hub Live, Nick Nigro will be joined by Susan Fleetwood, the Chief Economic Development Liaison at the North Carolina Department of Commerce, and Stan Cross, the Electric Transportation Policy Director at the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, to discuss transportation electrification progress and the areas for future growth in the Southeast. This episode is produced by Peter Benzoni and Tom Taylor of Atlas Public Policy. All right. Thanks a lot, Peter. And welcome to the show, Stan and Susan. Great to have you here.
Great to be here.
Let's jump right into it. Stan, so Atlas has been working with SACE, your organization, for the last couple of years on some reports. Just recently, we published our second version of State of Electrification in the Southeast. And so let's talk about it. So from your perspective, what were some of the key findings?
Well, I think, first off, it's really exciting to be tracking metrics at a time when this market is beginning to experience some significant growth. I think one thing that really stood out for me in this year's report was just how much positive change has occurred since we last looked at these metrics last year. And we track with Atlas Public Policy manufacturing employment and investment, as well as sales and charging infrastructure deployment in the Southeast, and utility investment and government funding. And what we see, and if you want to bring up the slide that shows these changes, what we see in 2021 is growth across all of these indicators. We're seeing a 33% increase in manufacturing employment and over 60% increase in manufacturing investment in the Southeast. And I think that's the really big story here, is that the Southeast is becoming a hub for manufacturing, employment and investment in and around passenger EV vehicles, as well as medium and heavy duty vehicles. It was also really exciting. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it seems like there's announcements every week, right?
It does every day. In fact, yesterday we heard about announcements in Tennessee. Ford is part of Ford's largest single investment in its 118-year history, building out the manufacturing capacity for the Ford F-150 Lightning. So yeah, it's really exciting to see. And what's also really exciting is to notice that along with that manufacturing investment and the jobs that are being created, we're seeing EV sales and charger deployment also begin to pick up in the Southeast, which has been historically lagging the rest of the nation in both indicators. And though the Southeast still does lag, we're seeing significant growth. And I think what's really interesting with in looking at this sales growth chart is to see that beginning in 2020, every state that we are tracking is beginning to get that really sharp upward growth trajectory. And this is during a time when we've all been dealing with a pandemic and the health and economic consequences of that pandemic. And the last thing that I'll say is that in looking at utility investment and government spending, which are two key metrics for supporting market growth, we're seeing an expansion of both in the Southeast, especially in that utility investment. And I think we're at a time here in the region where utility commissions, regulators are beginning to understand the importance of utilities engaging in the space. And I think we're getting closer to regulators kind of figuring out, along with utilities, what the appropriate role for utilities to play in order to really accelerate market growth.
Yeah, for sure. Those utilities around the country are really starting to get off the dime and put some proposals together and projects in place, for sure. Susan, let's bring you into the conversation, talk about your state, North Carolina. So what we saw in our report is that manufacturing, employment and such is one of the strongest indicators in the region, in the Southeast.
with regards to EVs, at least. Can you talk about EV industry in North Carolina a little bit with the audience here and some of the benefits that the industry is bringing to your state?
Yeah, well, let me first thank you for the opportunity to participate today. And honestly, I was a little bit surprised to receive the invitation because I am not an expert in the electrification of transportation by any means. But I have been involved in economic development and in helping companies make the decision to locate or expand in North Carolina for the last 20 years. And we really seem to be on this precipice of this transition to electric vehicles. And pardon the pun, but that transition really shows signs of speeding up. And we've just seen some major investments by some companies like you were mentioning, and also from the federal government. And so this really provides us with an opportunity unlike we have seen in quite some time. And by that, I mean, we have an industry that can provide environmental benefits, public health benefits, consumer benefits, and economic benefits for our citizens. And so as a member of the state's team that's focused on these opportunities, we want to do all that we can to maximize all of these benefits for as many North Carolinians as possible. And as a member of the economic development team here at the Department of Commerce, we're especially focused on those economic benefits. And to us, really, that boils down to good paying jobs for folks. And so, as you mentioned, the manufacturing of electric vehicles and of this related infrastructure is both well established and growing in North Carolina. And so recently, Arrival announced that it was establishing its new North American headquarters in Charlotte and expects to create about 150 jobs. They followed that announcement with another one that indicated that they would be locating a new electric delivery van manufacturing operation also in Charlotte that is expected to create another 250 jobs. We have on the established company side, Thomas Built Buses, which is one of the largest manufacturers of school buses in High Point, and they are manufacturing their electric school buses here. And also the North American headquarters of Hitachi ABB Power Grids is located in Raleigh. And they're doing some interesting work with NC State, where they are working on a research project together to kind of work on some of the underlying power systems that are needed to support rapid charging for electric vehicles. And then another major internationally based company, Siemens, has operations all across North Carolina, but their operations in Wendell was where they manufacture some of the charging solutions for buses and trucks and heavy duty vehicles. So you can see from these examples, we have operations in R&D, in headquarter operations, and in manufacturing. So it's a really exciting time in the state.
Yeah, for sure. And I just want to reiterate your surprise as being a part of the EV Hub Live show and audience and such. You know, a lot of the early drivers of why EVs matter to people was environmental issues or energy security or energy related issues in general. But what's become evident, at least in the last few years, particularly this year, is this economic opportunity. It is huge. So I'd love if you could go a little bit more into detail about what are these companies looking for when they're picking North Carolina versus some other state, and how is the Southeast really taking advantage of the business environment that they have down there to attract all these investments? And of course, Stan, I'd love for you to chime in on that as well, but let's start with Susan.
Yeah, well, so on one level, EV companies look for a lot of the same things that other companies look for. Most notably today, companies are laser focused on talent. And we can demonstrate, a strong source of that talent in North Carolina through our existing manufacturing workforce. We've got more than 450,000 folks involved in manufacturing in the state, which is the largest in the Southeast. Of those, about 37,000 are employed at over 400 companies, specifically focused on transportation manufacturing, and over half in motor vehicle parts. And that's everything in North Carolina from tires to headliners. And we've got a growing talent pool in our state, both from in-migrations. We've had over 1 million people move to the state over the last decade, as well as kind of a unique opportunity for transitioning military personnel. We've got 5 military bases across the state and over 75,000 folks are transitioning out of the military every year. Many of them want to stay in North Carolina, and they provide a very high quality opportunity for employers. And then, of course, our 58 community colleges, our 16 public universities, many of our renowned research institutions, both public and private, are graduating and training those engineers, those software developers, those automotive technicians, that clean energy workforce of the future. So the talent is the critical driver. But companies are also focused on suppliers and on consumers. And North Carolina is blessed with a mid-Atlantic location, which allows us to have easy access to a lot of those. They're also focused on a strong business climate, which is typically business taxes and incentives, financial incentives. And don't get me wrong, those things are still important. But one of the things that is different is that EV companies are focused on a business climate that demonstrates some clean energy leadership at the state level. And they want to see that the state's executive leadership is making commitments to support the kind of policies that are important to them. So Governor Cooper's Executive Order 80, which pledges to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase the number of ZEV vehicles in the state and reduce energy consumption, is the kind of policies and leadership that they're looking for. And my final point is, it's not just EV companies that are looking for this kind of leadership in the states that they are seeking, whether they're a headquarters or a global manufacturer, or they're involved in life sciences or some consumer product. They want to see that their visions and their priorities align with the states.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot, where, it's one thing to make it a friendly business climate to build something. It's another to make it a friendly climate to purchase it. And, it's important to these companies that the folks that are building the vehicles can want to buy them as well. And so, Stan, let's bring you in here back and talk about why you think the Southeast is doing so well competing against the Midwest and some of the Sun Belt states and some of the other parts of the country in winning these investments, and maybe also speak to the role of government to that end.
Sure. So I think firstly, it's sort of recognizing that the Southeast has been a strong manufacturing hub in the auto industry for a long time now. So you've got major automakers producing traditional internal combustion engines in South Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia. And so as a result, there's a really robust supply chain established as well, and just a really strong sort of business community and state level support for the industry. And so there is that backbone upon which, this can be built upon. And I think that the Southeast is also uniquely positioned in that it has, and this is interesting when we're talking about electric vehicles, has lower cost electricity. Right. So that's a key piece for operations. And it's also a key piece for bringing forward some of the value of transitioning light, medium, and heavy duty vehicles to electricity. And then there's also this sort of issue, which is, a challenging one in that, the Southeast talent pool is really strong, but it's also a very the labor scene in the Southeast doesn't have a lot of regulation, right? So unions are not strong here in the region, and so there's also an attractiveness to companies from a labor cost perspective about coming to the Southeast, which is also a challenge, that I think this electrification and transportation moment has for us to reconcile, especially with the pressure that's being put down from the Biden administration to really make sure that workers are being treated fairly, making sure that we're respecting workers' rights to organize and things like that. So I think this moment is also bringing some healthy tension to the region and how we build up this industry, but we do it in a way that also helps to bolster the middle class and create really good quality paying jobs for folks.
Yeah, there's one thing about jobs in this sector is usually they're certainly far above the median wage in a lot of cases, and so they are good jobs. Susan, let's bring you back in and talk a little bit more about what you see as the role of government here in encouraging these companies to locate. You mentioned some things already about the business climate and the efforts by government to encourage the market itself and the adoption of the technology. What other things do you think you all could be doing right now to support the growth of the
Yeah,
industry?
there's a host of things that we are doing that help support that. In
Mhm.
addition to the Executive Order 80, Governor Cooper has also signed on to a memorandum of understanding with 14 other states on this commitment to phase out fossil fuel burning medium and heavy duty trucks. And North Carolina is the only Southeast state that's participating, only Southern state that's participating in this MOU. Our Department of Environmental Quality is prioritizing it's $67 million that it's getting from the VW settlement phase 2 funding on efforts to incentivize zero emissions vehicles. Our Department of Transportation has developed a zero emission vehicle plan, which is essentially a strategic plan to help accelerate EV adoption. And that had a lot of input from a lot of key public and private stakeholders. And then I think government also has an opportunity to kind of keep an eye on the big picture and see if there might be some areas for strategic investments to be made, maybe like, the charging infrastructure along key transportation corridors, and also an opportunity to raise public awareness as a champion, as a convener, to really make people aware of all the benefits that we were talking about before.
So Stan, I want to bring you back in because we did have a question in from the audience who are watching us on YouTube about, you mentioned, Susan, the Volkswagen settlement. And so Peter, if you could show up this person's question. I'm not exactly sure if it's totally right that Florida is directing all of its money to EVs, but I think they probably are directing a large share of it, like a lot of states. But so to what extent do you think that those kind of policies or those initiatives by government is driving interest in EV sales and helping spur the market?
Yeah, I think it's really important, and it's a good point. And Florida is doubling down their investment in electrification with the Volkswagen settlement. I'm not sure that really has much to do with why Florida is a leader in the Southeast. I think that has more to do with the fact that Florida has demographically is really well aligned with early EV adopters, and so they got some really great momentum there. And Florida is also one of only 2 states in the Southeast, Florida and Tennessee, where EV manufacturers can sell directly and service their vehicles directly to consumers in state. And that really helps Florida. And you can see that by Tesla sales. Tesla is able to sell and service vehicles directly to consumers in Florida. And as a result, Florida is one of Tesla's strongest markets. So that's an example of a policy that's in place in Florida and as well as in Tennessee, but in Florida in particular is really helping to accelerate the market. And I think that, when we think about what government can do, I think recognizing that there's a virtuous cycle that has the potential to exist in the Southeast. And that is that, as we secure more manufacturing investment that can create more jobs, it is for a particular product: electric cars, trucks, and buses. And so the more electric cars, trucks, and buses that are being sold in the region is strengthening the very market that's growing our manufacturing capacity. And if you bring up slide number 7, there's also this recognition that, here in the Southeast, there's, at least in the states that we're tracking for our reporting with Atlas, there is next to no oil production or refining. So all of the gas that's purchased to power internal combustion engines is being imported. And when consumers and fleet operators buy that gas and diesel, the majority of that money is leaving the region. If all the cars and trucks and buses were electric today, there'd be an extra $47 billion annually in the region's economy that would be in the pockets of consumers, local governments, and state government to do something else than buy gallons of gas and diesel. So there's a really significant sort of feedback loop that you can begin to see possible that starts with us making sure that the environment here in the Southeast is really conducive to transportation electrification. And then those benefits are going to start to flow.
Speaking of the environment in the Southeast and the benefits flowing, you mentioned earlier the announcement from Ford in Tennessee, big investment there. Could you share with folks some more of the details on it, the site that they're going to build, and why you think Ford ended up choosing to build in Tennessee versus another state?
Sure. Well, it's really so Ford is making an $11 billion investment in manufacturing the F series electric pickup truck, as well as batteries in both Tennessee and Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
And that $11 billion represents the single largest investment the company has made in 118 years. And the little over $5.5 billion that's going to be invested in Tennessee represents the single largest investment that state has ever had in manufacturing. Wow. So it just goes to talk to the scale of both what it's going to take to make this transition, but also the amount of opportunity that's going to be created. Mm-hmm. And what's also really exciting is that, as Ford and other companies, all the automakers are making this transition, they're thinking about it holistically in a way that they never did with the internal combustion engine. So, for example, at the facility in Tennessee, which is going to be about 50 miles north of Memphis, is going to be also a battery production facility that's going to be able to fully recycle all the batteries that are produced. So they're working with redwood materials out of California to create a process by which these batteries will be able to be, recycled, and those precious materials that go into them can be reused. So I think that dynamic reality of these new facilities creating jobs, bringing in investment, but also reworking the way we think about transportation as more of a cradle to cradle manufacturing process is also
insourcing, right? I mean, it's insourcing instead of outsourcing. I grew up in the 80s, in the 90s, it was about outsourcing and whatnot. Now it's, with this investment, my reading of it, they're going to try to be building more and more of the vehicle and putting more and more of the supply chain closer to the vehicle, and that's gonna be a lot of insourcing, essentially.
It is, and I think I can't speak to why at the end of the day Ford chose Tennessee over another state, but I will recognize that when we're looking at the Southeast and we're looking at who's leading, Tennessee is out ahead, right? So Tennessee is sort of the gold standard in the Southeast for having secured investment and in this space. And so and the last thing that I'll say is that when a company like Ford announces this transition, the reverberation is really significant. And I think anybody who's paying attention is sort of feeling this right now, in that Ford series of vehicles that they produce brings in more revenue than the entire Nike company does every year, brings in more revenue than Visa does every year. I mean, that is the number one selling truck in the country, and it is a moneymaker. And so transitioning to electric, it's opening up a whole new segment. It's bringing a new vehicle type to market, which is critical for fleets. But it's also, happens to be, what is the most popular vehicle in the country.
So, you mentioned a few minutes ago, Stan, about like how things are changing so rapidly. You've been doing this for a little while, I think. I'm not sure. Maybe your beard was a little more colored like mine than yours when you first started. So why don't you, tell us a little bit about what's changed over the last few years in the Southeast in particular from your vantage?
Well, I have the honor of participating in the statewide planning efforts in Tennessee, North Carolina, Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida that are underway right now. And I think one significant change is that, states at the highest level are doing really sophisticated planning to understand how to maximize this economic development opportunity, but also how to how to make sure that as this transition occurs, everybody in the region has equitable access to transportation. So one of the things that's really shifted over the 15 years I've been in this space is the conversation about equity and access, and the recognition that, communities are disproportionately burdened by air pollution caused by the transportation sector, that not all folks have equal access to vehicles, that low to moderate income communities, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities and rural communities are often left behind during transitions of technology. And that awareness is front and center in the conversation about transportation electrification. And I've never seen that before in a technology shift. And I think it's really exciting, and it gives us a chance to, reimagine not only how do we electrify transportation, but how do we create an equitable mobility future that's addressing climate, that's making sure everyone has access, and that's growing the economic strength of the region.
There is a lot of marrying of initiatives around the country right now in policy, from the climate community to the justice community, and EVs are a way of bringing that together. We definitely see that. Before I turn back to you, Susan, Tom at Atlas pulled up the tweet from a statement from Ford yesterday about why they chose Tennessee. So let's just see what they said here. So basically, site size, shovel readiness, and proximity to other EV sites. That hits right on your point, Stan. What you said were all key factors that went into why they chose it. And so it's that virtuous cycle that you just said, that you were speaking to. That's what helped win the day for Ford in Tennessee.
Yeah, which is really exciting to see. And part of that also, and I think the other change I'll speak to that's happened while I've been in the space is electric transportation, unlike some other clean energy or alternative solutions, really is garnering bipartisan support. So there's, even though we have policy challenges in the Southeast and that will need to be overcome, there's support for the technology across the aisle, and you can find ways with transportation to connect to different perspectives and points of view that are difficult to do with energy efficiency or renewable energy or other technologies that will address climate and enhance the economic well-being of the region.
Right on. Speaking of policy and such, Susan, what is your priority over the next 12, 24 months in getting the next big Ford investment into your state?
Well, interestingly, as it relates to attracting EVs or EV related companies. And so that's OEMs, but that's battery manufacturers, that's those who make charging equipment or software. I kind of go back to the nuts and bolts of economic development. And I had this written down before you shared the tweet. What I have first on that list is making sure we have good sites. Yeah. We need good industrial sites and the sites with the right infrastructure. So that's water, sewer, roads, and they are ready for quick development. Also, I think it's important that we are able in North Carolina to be able to tell our story about talent, that we are investing in our educational institutions so that future pipeline for growth is there. And of the research that's going on at our universities, because it provides companies sometimes with a really unique opportunity to have access or participate in some cutting edge research and technologies. And at the same time, kind of have an inside track, if you will, to some very high skilled, in demand talent. Mm-hmm. On the policy side, in North Carolina, we're going to continue to focus on the implementation of the heavy duty zero emission vehicle MOU that I mentioned before. We expect that there'll be a multi-state action plan that is initially released, and then we'll be activating the components related or specific to North Carolina. We're going to be focusing on implementing the VW settlement funds, also on transitioning the state's motor fleet. And that's both increasing the number of electric vehicles and the charging infrastructure. And then we're going to continue to seek some opportunities to serve as a convener to kind of raise awareness about the benefits, whether that's with fleet owners and operators or OEMs or those that provide that charging infrastructure. And we're going to keep an eye on and keep thinking about our state's policy environment and see if there are some improvements or things that we can make there. So we've got a lot on our plate for the next 1 to 2 years.
I believe it. And Stan, another question came in from the audience that I think hits right on where I wanted to take our conversation with you next. And what state's going to focus on over the next 12 months from your side on transportation electrification? What are some of the most important factors you think that are going to be driving adoption? We looked at the charts. Sales are up. There's kinks in the curve. Acceleration is happening. It's not just happening in the Southeast, though. There's growth across the country too. So how is the Southeast going to continue to, cement itself as a leader in EVs?
So there's 4 specific things that we'll be focusing on in the coming year. One is to support folks like Susan and the Department of Commerce in North Carolina really get that public policy environment conducive to continued growth, both on the consumer adoption side, on the fleet adoption side, but also to continue to make the Southeast attractive to manufacturers. We'll also Southern Alliance for Clean Energy also focuses in the utility sector. We work with regulators and utilities, and we'll be spending a lot of time this year working with utilities that they implement electric transportation pilots that have been approved by regulators, but also continue our outreach to regulators to really, help drive the conversation of, what is that appropriate role for utilities to play, and how can we unlock sort of the capital that exists in the investor-owned utilities. Duke Energy, Florida Power and Light is owned by NextEra, Georgia Power and Alabama Power that are owned by Southern Company, right? These are massive businesses. How can we really help unlock that opportunity? And then the third is that we'll be working, really closely with local and state fleets, working on light, medium, and heavy duty adoption. That fleet piece is really critical in accelerating the market and getting the technology to scale, and which will help costs come down for fleets as well as consumers. And then the last thing we'll be focusing on is supporting the launch of the Southeast Electric Transportation Regional Initiative, also known as CETRI. And it's an initiative that just got launched about 2 weeks ago. It includes over 60 founding members, auto manufacturers, charging station companies, supply chain companies, as well as universities, clean cities coalitions, advocates, utilities. It's a really broad and strong group of stakeholders that are coming together to help push the Southeast forward.
Sounds like you guys have got your hands full here. So we'll let you get back to it. Really appreciate both of you joining us, Dan and Susan. Thank you so much for joining us on EV Hub Live, and special thanks to Peter for producing the show, and to Tom for fielding all the questions and gathering all the background research, and for doing all that work on the report with SACE. It's a great piece, and I encourage everyone to check it out online on our website. So that brings us to the end. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll be together again soon. Take it easy. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Nick. Bye, everyone.